So through the cross, God has broken down the wall of hostility between ethnicities, and he has paved the way for us to live in unity together. This is a very theological way of seeing this. And so to get out of the theology for a moment and go, okay, how does this actually work? So God, you're saying that you've brought down the dividing wall of hostility, but everywhere that I look in the world, I see fighting. And it doesn't matter what country we go to, there's this group that hates that group, and that's just reality. That is our human experience. And so one of the key components that the gospel brings is forgiveness. And it's not a cheap forgiveness. You know, we are often asked to forgive, and this is viewed as cheap or as someone trying to force peace on us or force the truce on us. And so there's two ways that we struggle with forgiveness. Number one is giving, and the second is receiving. And both of these ultimately will relate to how do we trust the one who has paid for our forgiveness in the first place? How do we trust his word and his proclamation? And so on the receiving side, there are people who don't receive forgiveness. And even people who are in Christ, right? We think, well, okay, God has died for me, and I can believe in him and have forgiveness for my sins. Okay, yes, I believe I'm experiencing this forgiveness. And then we think about that very darkest, most shameful, most embarrassing, most guilty moment. And this is something that we hang on to and we nurse like it's some wound in our life. Well, the reality is that God has forgiven that. He has paid for that sin. And so as we hang on to it and say, no, this sin isn't dealt with yet. This sin is too bad, too shameful. We're essentially saying, God, your declaration that on the basis of Christ's punishment, that I don't have to be punished for this, that this is washed clean, that this account is closed, I don't trust you. Or we're saying, well, your punishment wasn't enough, let's punish Jesus some more for this. Or we're saying somehow my punishment would make this better, even though Christ's punishment is complete. And so this is an essential thing for us to understand and to really gain freedom from the guilt, from the shame, from the fear, is in actually seeing that Christ has paid this punishment and that God receives his punishment on our behalf is what should alleviate us from all of this. Now, we're often told to forgive. There's the famous story, how many times should I forgive my brother? Should I forgive him 7 times? And Jesus says no, 70 times 7. And he's just speaking of a number of completeness, an unimaginable number of times to forgive someone. But the Bible doesn't exactly give us steps on how to forgive. It just declares that we should forgive, and it tells us that God has paved the way for this and that everything is better now. But it's not, and we're struggling with this. And so I want to pull from a couple of different sources that I've already cited already. One is from Rick Love in his book, Peace Catalyst. And he says there's some rules for forgiveness, and these are his. Number 1, he says, I will no longer dwell on this incident. So in the event that you say you're sorry to me or I say I'm sorry to you and we offer forgiveness, this can't be just quick and easy words. This has to really mean something in the mind of the one who is doing the forgiving, which is, you've come to me, you're looking for a clean slate, and when I say I forgive you, this isn't coming back up again. It's very easy to see this in family environments or environments where people have a long history together, where the moment something happens, immediately I'm pulling from this treasure trove of events way in the back, and I'm going, aha, see, you haven't changed. This is exactly like you've always been all along. Even though these were all events where there was the process of reconciliation, there was forgiveness sought and forgiveness offered, but I'm dwelling on it. I'm just thinking about it. And this relates to point number 2. I will not bring up this incident again or use it against you. And so again, we in dwelling on this event, we sit there and we just start mulling over it, and then it comes back into our present conversation. And so when we offer forgiveness, we have to say, no, this is not coming back up again. Number 3, I will not talk to others about this incident. This is what the Bible calls gossip. And so someone hurts us, and immediately we go seek counsel from a friend. We ask prayer for what is coming up. And essentially all we're doing is trying to get God's approval for us to gossip, and we don't have it. We're not allowed to gossip. This is not how Christian conflict is supposed to go. This is not one of the essential steps of Christian conflict is gossip. And so that commitment of I will not talk about this with others builds trust. It means if I can come to you and ask your forgiveness and I know that you forgive me and we're better, I don't have to think about you going and just spreading this around, because God's forgiveness is designed to cover our shame and our guilt, not to spread it around. Thus, if we're going to be forgiving like God is forgiving, we have to follow the same actions of we're burying this, we're putting it in the past, we're taking your dirty clothes and we're covering it in a cloak of Christ's righteousness. And number 4, I will not allow this incident to stand between us or hinder our relationship. I see a lot of times where people will apologize to each other and then just part their separate ways and never see each other again. This is not Christian reconciliation. The goal behind seeking and offering forgiveness is that the relationship will be restored. Remember, we're not just managing conflict. We're not just putting this child who's fighting in this room and this one in this room. Now there's silence. Now there's peace. We're not looking for a truce. We're looking for the presence of harmony. We're looking for reconciliation. And so, how do you know if you've forgiven someone or haven't forgiven someone? Francis Schaeffer, in his book, The Mark of a Christian, it's a short booklet about 30 pages long. Highly recommend it. He says that love is the mark of the Christian. It's not our denominational badge. It's not our fervor for going on mission trips or going to church or listening to Christian music or wearing Christian clothes. It is love. And he's quoting from John. He says, "They will know you are my disciples by your love." That's the words of Jesus. And so he says, well, how do you know if you love someone? Okay, it's easy to love someone when everything is going great. It's easy to love someone when they're doing what you want, or they're not messing up, or they're not bothering you, but that's obviously not the mark of love. When God chose to love a people, to love the Jewish people and to make a covenant with them, he didn't pick them necessarily because they were amazing. He picked them because it would help him show his love, because he knew that when he made his covenant, they would walk away from his covenant. This seems nonsensical to us. When we make a covenant with our spouse, we want them to uphold it. We want them to stick to their statement of faithfulness and loyalty in the marriage vow, not to walk away from it. But Jesus picked them knowing they would walk away from it so that he could show his love to people who did not deserve his love, to show what a good lover he is. So if we're going to say, how do we know if we love someone? It's not, do we love them in the good times? It's, can we forgive them? This is what Schaeffer says. So forgiveness is the litmus test for love. Okay, that's helpful, but it also just kicks the can further down the road. Well, how do I know if I've forgiven someone? So he gives 2 statements. He says, number 1, if you would no longer be happy to see something bad happen to your enemy, you've probably forgiven them. And the flip side is, if you would no longer be sad if something good happened to your enemy, you've probably forgiven them. And so there's a lot of times where we forgive someone and we would really still celebrate to see them, trip and stub their toe or something. And that's probably a good sign that our forgiveness was just words and we still have some hard issues to work through. But forgiveness is not a cheap and easy thing. We're told to forgive, and I realize in some of the reconciliation talks, particularly some things that have happened in South Africa with the Truth and Consequences and other events where there's a perpetrator who is in power, and then they decide that they're no longer going to do the things that were bad, and then basically they tell the people that they've been hurting, it's time for you to forgive us because we're sorry. This isn't exactly how the whole system should work. We can't declare that someone should forgive us. Forgiveness has to be something that God is bringing about in their heart. And so how does this happen for us? We look at the sin of, let's say, the sin of racism that's happening in our country, or prejudice, or hate, or selfishness. Take any sin that impacts 2 different groups or 2 different people. And you go, okay, we are right to be angry about this. We are right to protest this. We are right to make a stand about these things. But how do we forgive them? Well, the reality is that Jesus has paid and taken the punishment for the sin of racism, prejudice, pride, envy, strife, all of the sins that we can do. Jesus has paid. Now, we understand this on a personal level. I have received Christ's forgiveness. God has forgiven me. But when you make me upset, guess what? The wrongdoing that you have done, that punishment is placed on Jesus. And so if I refuse to forgive you, I'm essentially saying Jesus' punishment isn't sufficient. He should be punished some more so that it will sufficiently pay for what you have done. So if we don't forgive, we're essentially judging that Jesus' punishment wasn't sufficient, or that God's declaration that you are clean now is also insufficient. In the same way that when I don't receive his forgiveness over something that I'm nursing, I'm saying, God, your judgment is off about me. Yes, you're right about the other sinners you've forgiven, but you're wrong about me. You don't tell the king he's wrong. And it's the same thing when you don't offer forgiveness to someone who has hurt you, even though God has already paid for their sin. You are saying there's something wrong with God's payment, or there's something wrong with his righteousness. And so if we think about, can we forgive people? This isn't just a social thing. This relates back to us and our spirituality. Remember, reconciliation is a spirituality rather than a strategy. And so when I am struggling to forgive, or when I am able to forgive, this is a sign of what has God been doing in my life. Because forgiveness is not natural, right? Hating my enemy, trying to hurt my enemy, trying to kill my enemy, this is natural. This is human nature, fallen human nature. But forgiving and loving my enemy, this is not at all natural. And so when I am able to love and to forgive, this should be exciting to me, because this means I can see the working. I have a benchmark that God is working in my life. And so I want to close with this question. Who have you not forgiven? That one's a hard one, because it goes back to some moment that we're still harboring anger and bitterness. And you might say, well, they haven't asked for forgiveness. Honestly, our forgiveness doesn't have to do with being asked for it, because our forgiveness is related to, am I willing to accept what Christ has done in my life, not just in my life, but in their life as sufficient payment for what they have done. And that is something that just requires an amount of peace and love and calm in me that can only be brought about by the gospel transforming and renewing me. And this isn't an instantaneous process, right? We go through a period of hurt or agony or trauma even, depending on what's been done to us. And all of this is part of that growth and reconciliation process. But who have you not forgiven? Write that name down. Pray for them. And the second thing I want you to talk about or think about is, what are you rejecting forgiveness for? What is that thing in your life that you were telling the king, no, your righteousness is not enough. Your judgment is not correct. This is the thing that is too far for you.